Paul Fronczak on April 27, 1964. A one-day-old baby named Paul Fronczak was stolen from Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. Paul was the second child of his parents, Chester and Dora Fronczak. Their first child had been stillborn. At 9:30 p.m., a woman came into Dora's room dressed as a nurse. While Paul was nursing, she unwrapped his blanket, looked at him, and then left without saying a word. At 1:30 p.m., the woman returned and told Dora that she needed to take Paul away to be examined by the doctor. But she never returned. 20 minutes later, a real nurse came into Dora's room to take Paul to the nursery. It was at this point everyone realized that Paul was missing. An immediate search was called of the hospital, but after having no luck finding Paul, the hospital notified police. Police determined that the abductor took Paul down a back staircase, left the hospital through the rear entrance, and took a cab to the vicinity of 35th and Halsted, at which point the trail was lost. The police believed that the abductor had a good idea of the hospital layout and staff routines after a year of no leads. On July 22, 1965, the I contacted Dora and Chester and said that a toddler resembling Paul had been found, abandoned outside the store in Newark, New Jersey. This abandoned toddler had been left in a stroller in a busy shopping center and was currently being fostered by a family. The boy was named Scott McKinley by New Jersey Child Protection Authorities. FBI agents tested Scott's blood and thought he might be Paul, but DNA testing was not available in the 1960s, and Paul's blood type hadn't been taken. Before his kidnapping, there was only one photo of baby Paul taken at the hospital, and the FBI couldn't establish the abandoned child's identity. Paul's parents believed Scott was their child and legally adopted him when he was 2 years old. They would go on to raise the toddler as Paul. As Paul grew up, he became suspicious that he wasn't really Dora and Chester's son, as he didn't resemble the rest of the family members. In 2012, Paul would convince his parents to take a DNA test to find out if he really was their biological son. They agreed, and a DNA test proved he was not their biological son. The adopted Paul then enlisted a genetic genealogist to help determine his identity, and they got a match in 2015. His birth name was Jack Rosenthal, and he had 4 siblings. It was also found that he had a twin sister named Jill. Paul's mother, Marie, was a heavy drinker, and his dad, Gilbert, was badly affected by the Korean War. One day, Jack and Jill would mysteriously disappear shortly before their 2nd birthday. Jack and Jill's parents lied about the twins' whereabouts, telling both sides of their family that the children were with the other side. Eventually, the parents warned relatives not to talk about them and removed Jack and Jill from the family photos. Their disappearance would never be reported. His biological parents are now deceased. Jack still has no idea what happened to Jill and hopes to find her someday. The man thought to be Paul is now 49 years old and resides in Nevada. In light of this new information, the FBI reopened the case and began searching for the real Paul Fronczak. In December 2, 2019, he was identified through genetic testing as a 55-year-old man living in rural Michigan. The man has been notified of his true identity, but his name and exact whereabouts have not been made public yet. Maria Curie. In the 1960s, Maria Curie was married to Albert R. Curie, and both bought a house at 5445 Black Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At the time, Mary and Albert had 2 children. In the fall of 1964, Albert would tell the family members that his wife had left him and the children. He also said that she took all her belongings with her. Mary was never seen again. The family found it very difficult to believe that she would walk out on her children. Albert insisted that Mary indeed left him and the children behind. There were rumors around the town that Mary and Albert were going through marital problems. Albert had apparently accused Mary of being unfaithful. No missing person report was ever filed, as everyone believed Mary had left of her own accord. A year later, in 1965, Albert was driving his car when the car crashed into the Doane Allen Chevrolet car dealership on Baum Boulevard. It was found that Albert was, quote, traveling at a terrific rate of speed, and his car left skid marks for 250 feet. It was determined that the crash could have been avoided and that Albert chose to take his own life. After Albert's death, the children were taken in and raised by a relative. Their house would eventually be sold to new owners. For 55 years, Mary's disappearance remained unsolved. Then in February of 2018, construction workers were working in the yard of a house when they discovered human remains. When the police couldn't identify the remains, they consulted a retired police officer, Teresa Rocco, who led the Bureau's Missing Persons Unit and happened to live next door to the Arcuris. In fact, she was the godmother of Arcuri's daughter. Teresa never investigated Mary's disappearance, as no missing persons report was ever filed. When a current detective consulted Teresa about skeletal remains found on the property, Teresa was able to provide the detective copies of a report and dental records, which ruled out the woman he initially suspected the remains belonged to. Shortly after that, Teresa remembered the home had previously belonged to the Arcuris, and Mary had gone missing. This led investigators to contact Mary Arcuri's relatives to collect DNA samples, and in February of 2019, the remains were identified as belonging to Mary Arcuri. The Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office couldn't determine the cause and manner of Mary's death. Consequently, no charges were ever filed. Police cannot speculate on how Mariah Carey died or why she was buried in the backyard, but it is believed that Albert killed and buried Mary in the backyard and then lied about it to his family. Mary's great-nephew, Charles Sabrina, was about 5 when Mary went missing. He said he recalled Albert had built a cement patio in the back of the house shortly after his wife supposedly left. He also said he believes his mother or another relative did file a missing persons report, but for some reason police did not take it seriously. Mary's disappearance would be solved after 55 years. Debre Jakson was a 23-year-old from Abilene, Texas. In 1977, Debre left her home from Abilene and was never seen by family members again. In 1978, she was working at a Ramada Inn, now called Camelot Inn, in Amarillo, Texas. Later that year, she began working at an assisted living center called Bermont Inc. in Ashley, Texas. She also worked for Ari West NCG, Cole Admiral PTR Realty Investment Limited. In 1979, this would be the last confirmed sighting of her, as Debre was known for leaving home. She was not reported as missing at the time and was not entered into any database for missing persons. The family members believed she had run away from home and was living her life somewhere else. On Halloween night 1979, the body of a young woman was found in a concrete culvert near Interstate 35, outside of Georgetown, about 30 miles north of Austin. She had been the victim of a sexual assault and had apparently died the same day. Her body was discovered. She was found nude except for a pair of orange socks. Her body was battered from the fall and the abuse at the hands of her killer. Her neck showed visible bruises. For manual strangulation, there were significant amounts of blood found at both the murder scene and the body dump area. There were no personal belongings at the scene. The killer must have taken her clothes and anything else she had with them. According to the coroner, her legs were unshaven, and she appeared to have been in an unkempt condition. The investigators did find a towel at the crime scene that was used in place of a sanitary napkin. She was wearing a silver ring on her right hand and had pierced ears at the scene of the crime. There were 2 matchbooks and a key belonging to a motel in Henrietta, Oklahoma, which the police believe supported their theory that she might have been a hitchhiker or a drifter moving through Texas. As the police were not able to identify the woman, she was nicknamed Orange Socks by the police. For 3 years, the police did not find any leads. But in 1982, a convicted serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, confessed to killing the Orange Socks girl. He said he had picked up the girl in Oklahoma, where they had consensual sex. She had told him her name was Joni or Judy. When the two were driving through Texas, he again asked for sex and she said not right now, and attempted to get out of the car. He said it was then that he killed her and raped her corpse before disposing of her body along Interstate 35. In 1984, Lucas was convicted of her murder and given the death sentence. He stood by his story until 1984 when he recanted. In 1998, his death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment by former President George W. Bush. Then governor of Texas, Lucas died in 2001 in prison. Orange Socks was buried in Georgetown's IOOF cemetery with the words "Unidentified Woman 1979. Over the years, the police followed several leads in hopes of finding out her identity, but with no luck. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children would create new reconstruction photos of the girl in the orange socks. Then in 2019, the Williamson County Sheriff's Office tweeted out an updated version of the forensic sketch of Orange Socks that would lead to a crucial breakthrough in the case. A woman from Abilene reached out to investigators after seeing the sketch on the news and claimed that Orange Socks was her 23-year-old sister, Debre Jakson. Genetic genealogists would take a DNA sample from the woman and compared it to the DNA profile from Orange Socks. In the meantime, police were able to identify Jakson by consulting with a family and comparing the photos they provided with those taken after her autopsy. They cited her long toes, unique earlobes, and scars from impetigo. The DNA test would confirm that the unidentified woman found was indeed Debre Jakson. Orange Socks was finally identified after 40 years. The reason for her death and the male DNA found on Jackson's fingernail clippings is still being investigated.